Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Owning It podcast. My name is Poiab, and my intention of this whole podcast is to talk to people who are forging their own path and who are owning it, and now empowering others to forge their own path and owning it too. And so I am very lucky to have the transition wizard, Joseph Frankie III, with me today. How are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, thank you. It was funny. So before we recorded this, I said, "What do you want this episode to be called?" And you said, "I am the transition wizard." And what does that mean to be a transition wizard, Joe?
Well, you know, some people say, well, you help people find employment. And and what I like to say is I end up working with people so they can basically organize themselves to get what they want.
Okay.
So usually when people want something else, they're in sort of transition or at least thinking about transitioning. Part of that might be pivoting, part of it might be changing a different sector, part of it might be starting the side hustle for an entrepreneurial thing. Different people, basically want different things. And it requires a slightly different approach in order to help them get what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I want to mention that you are also the co-author of LinkedIn, a 5-minute drill for executive networking success.
Right. Lori Ruff and I co-authored that book. It's a 1 hour read. It's rated 4.9 out of 50 on Amazon.
Mm.
And I think the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life is write a book that's only 1 hour in length with a female co-author.
It's hard because a lot of us had the tendency we can go on and on and on. I think writing a
Yeah.
4 or 5 hour book is easy. Trying to condense everything in 1 hour is the hardest part.
It it really is. There's something to be said. As I went through this editing process, for people that are editors, hey,
Mhm.
that's almost a god-given passion.
Shout out to all the editors out there. Yeah. And so I will also LinkedIn, I will also put the link to that book in the description box. And I'm excited to say that I also bought the book. I haven't had a chance to read it. So I have an hour. We all have an hour, and I am going to read it because, you and I, so before you and I recorded, you and I met before just to kind of chat. And you said that besides being a transition wizard, you're all about storytelling. And I think we know the power of storytelling, but we don't think of storytelling, especially in our LinkedIn and our resumes. So how important is storytelling in those areas?
Well, storytelling is really, really important because if you think about an interview and you get a question in an interview, your response is a story, usually explaining how you solved the particular problem they asked you about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of the interview process and people work on that. There's all kinds of tools online, but bottom line, you're telling a story about yourself. And I think LinkedIn gives you ample opportunity in multiple places to tell multiple stories. And the story always needs to have a structure that says who, what, when, where, why, how, and the metrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the story that you solved a problem, you either saved money, increased efficiency, reduced man hours. If not, there's no reason for somebody to give you that task, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually to improve something or stop something else from happening that's untoward or like that. But storytelling is basically wired into us. It's only been in recent times that we didn't rely on stories, as 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 the accumulation of knowledge. and wisdom from elders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've always had storytelling throughout history. And I don't want to say recently, but yeah, when you go to interview, they ask you all these behavioral questions because they want to see how did you handle a particular situation.
Right. I'm in the executive search process as well, and so you end up interviewing people, and helping them try to get their LinkedIn and resumes straight for that particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
And a resume is, it's a shorter version, right? But a resume is a response, a direct response to a position specification or job description. And the LinkedIn profile is everything you be, know, do, since, high school and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
People say, well, Joe, I mean, I don't have my high school on there. Why do I have to have it on there? I said, well, I'm an executive search agent. And people ask me to go look for when people had the earliest fiscal responsibility. In other words, they,
Mm.
and
Wow.
so that has been a requirement because people want to say, did somebody else give you some responsibility, like at a
Mhm.
cash register or something like that? Uh, and so there, if you worked in high school, all those kind of stuff, those are stories. Those are
Mm.
development at an early age,
Mhm.
and there's places to hang those in that particular education section of LinkedIn.
Mhm.
So back to the resume, it's a direct response, right?
Mhm.
The 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 answers and the stories you've built into your resume are directly in response to the questions and the requirements of the candidate, on the position spec or job description. And then everything else that people want to know about you is on your LinkedIn profile. A long time ago, we used to say you needed a general resume or a CV, which
Mhm.
kind of had the laundry list of everything you've done. Well, LinkedIn is that area now. And so when you populate a resume, a lot of times I'm always looking, say, okay, that's on their resume. Where is it on their LinkedIn profile? Because I can't afford to have any thing that's on a resume and not populated on a LinkedIn profile because that's a disconnect.
Mhm.
And the clients will ask me why.
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah.
an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Mhm. Yeah. So let's go back. So you help, just to clarify, you help people kind of like rebuild, not kind of, you help them rebuild their LinkedIn profile to tell a story. And how did you get here? Because your background is very unique. I feel very honored to talk to a retired colonel. And how did all this came about you? Because you have a very unique background, and how did it come to you become being a transition wizard?
Well, you try to find a couple of words that explain something very quickly. And so, that came about one day, when LinkedIn was decided, well, here's a place for pronouns, he, she, me, they, we, all that stuff. And I said, well, you know, I think they can pretty much figure out I'm a guy, with my picture. And, but what is it I do? Who do I want to be? And I just came up with the idea transition wizard. And I had to stay under so many letters, and it took it, right?
Mhm.
So I put that in there, and I think that aptly describes, what I end up doing with helping people. Um, the I've helped people or coached, assisted people all the way from the age of 14,
Wow.
and that is 14-year-old trying to get into an extremely private high school,
Mhm.
all the way to an 84-year-old wanting to get back in the workforce.
84?
Right.
Okay.
So, but the bulk of my clients are 40 plus year olds trying to figure out what's next.
So like me.
Well, what happens is after 40, right?
Mhm.
Um, say once you get up around 45,
Okay.
nobody's chasing you anymore.
That's true.
Okay. Up to
Nobody's
while you're
chasing
in your
you in
30s,
everything.
while in your 30s, you get the calls from the recruiters. Hey, we found you. What do you think about this? But once you get up in the 40s, it's a whole different ball game because
Mhm.
now you have to merchandise. You have to sell how you solve problems with people. In other words, how do you integrate into a team? Or how do you go somewhere and create a culture where these people that weren't working together now work together and you get this project done?
Mhm.
So, those kind of stories are the kind of stories that you need populated on LinkedIn, especially when you're in your 40s, because people are looking for people that can go and solve that same problem that you
Mhm.
describe in their company.
Mhm.
So the easiest way to market yourself is say, I've been there and done that. And so a lot of people just use LinkedIn like the front page of the Wall Street Journal
Hmm.
and really just kind of like above the fold, right? And if you notice the way the Wall Street Journal is organized, well, okay, here's two paragraphs, but if you want more, it's page 6. Here's kind of the headline. If you want more, it's page 2.
Mhm.
All of this kind of stuff. So LinkedIn gives you that same capability, but most people just populate the front page of, of the Wall Street Journal. And the
Mhm.
Wall Street Journal gives you pages 2 through 15, an op-ed section, a finance section, and some other sections. And LinkedIn actually emulates that whole thing. And so you have all these places that you can populate this content,
Mhm.
good content, right?
Mhm.
Um, Not just a list of keywords. Because if you tell a story, what happens? You have to use a noun and verb to make a sentence. Sentences make up paragraphs. And if you've actually done something, you end up describing in this story with keywords
Mhm.
that you actually, done something. And oh, by the way, this was the outcome. We made money, we saved money, we increased efficiency, we reduced man hours or whatever the requirement was. I know
Mhm.
very few companies that give you a task with they don't care what the outcome is,
Mhm. Yeah.
and so with the military people, when I'm working with them, I said, look, we need to lay out the stories behind your projects. And he said, well, sir, I never worked on a project. And I said, did anybody ever give you an order? Oh, I got plenty of orders in my career. I said, well, I did too.
Mhm.
Well, and once they give you an order, then you have a task. It's been assigned. You have a condition that you're going to perform it in, and you have a standard, that somebody's going to come back and check on. So, in essence, that's a project. Anyway, so LinkedIn just gives you all these different areas to hang various different types of stories. And the second thing that people are starting to become more aware of on a resume, you can't sell your emotional intelligence.
Very true.
You can only sell your IQ.
Mhm.
And on a LinkedIn profile, you can sell, market, and merchandise your emotional intelligence. And the reason I say that is a resume is a black and white photograph snapshot, right?
Mhm.
2 pages in length. It's a
Mhm.
direct response to a job description, or the position specification. Whereas the LinkedIn profile is everything that you be, know, do.
Mhm.
Okay. And see, in LinkedIn, there's a volunteer section.
Hmm.
So you volunteer, you support things. You're on a board at church. You support the girls club. You got Cub Scouts, you got Boy Scouts. You're doing Little League.
Mhm.
All those things. You know, help develop you.
Mhm.
Because you know what, most of them are hard.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're a volunteer, right?
Yeah.
There's no money in this. This is just trying to help the
Well, there's
kids,
not. Mhm.
develop and all of those kinds of stuff. And so if you're doing that, you are learning all kinds of things at that time.
Mhm.
But see, I don't know that if you don't put it there.
Right.
So let me give you an example.
Okay.
So one time I'm working on an executive search for a client. So I got the position spec, and so the position spec's great, and some of them are really great. But I always like to go have lunch with, try to say, okay, could the people that are going to be doing the interviewing and the guy that gave me the job, can we have lunch? Hey, where you all want to go have lunch? Let's go. And in that conversation, I'll find out a lot that's not on that piece of paper. Because one time I said, what are you really looking for? He said, Joe, I really, I'm an Eagle Scout. And what I think I need is an Eagle Scout. They're capable of, organizing this, so I got the message there. I need to find some Eagle Scouts.
Mhm.
So anyway, the next time I brought a series of candidates in for interviews, three of them were Eagle Scouts and, two of them weren't. It was a mix, we had woman in there and everything.
Mhm.
Um, so went through with that, and sure enough, he picked one of the Eagle Scouts. And so I had another gentleman come and say, "Hey, Joe, I worked up with you. Is there going to be a second round of interviews?" And I said, "Well, no. I mean, the gentleman, made a decision, and that's where we're at." And he said, "Why do you think? What do you think the key factor was?" In that. I said, I think he was really wanting somebody that, had the trust, confidence, background of an Eagle Scout.
Mhm.
And he said, Joe, I'm an Eagle Scout. And I said, no, you're not.
Hmm.
And he said, Joe, I'm telling you, I am. I said, no, I'm sorry, you're not an Eagle Scout. And so then he went to his wallet, and all the Eagle Scouts, I mean, they have an identification card, a number, the whole 9 yards to
Mhm.
prove that they're an Eagle Scout. And he said, well, here's my card. And I said, if it's not on your LinkedIn profile, you never, ever in your life did it.
Mhm.
And then I said, there's a lesson to be learned here. You probably would have been on those first five to go in there, but I didn't know you were an Eagle Scout. These other people I found,
Mhm.
because I did search,
Mhm.
in LinkedIn for Eagle Scout. And so as well as the other criteria that they wanted. Um, but I said, I hope you learned a very valuable
Mhm.
lesson today. You know,
Yeah.
if it's not on there, it's not on your billboard, and when people say, "Well, John, I want to put all that stuff on there,"
Mhm.
and I said, "So that's okay. So in your billboard of life, you want a
Mhm.
small billboard so that you can't be seen." And that everybody sees the big billboards around you. I mean, that's a choice.
Mhm.
I respect it, but it's like getting on the bus. You can be at the front of the bus or you can choose to be at the back of the bus.
Mhm.
But if I'm an executive search person, we always take people off the first three seats on the front of the bus.
Mhm.
If you want to live in the back of the bus, you can, but don't expect, you know, that life is going to come to you. You got to make some effort out here.
Mhm. So I kind of get the person that said, but I am. You're like, no, you're not. I think a lot of us been told that we have to be small. especially on a resume. And so he was like, I didn't include that because I didn't think it was important. Because I think a lot of us, I'm remembering my own journey of finding a job. We've been told keep it 2 pages, only put the important stuff that you want to highlight. And now you're saying put everything down
I'm
because you
saying
want to tell the whole story.
everything down on the LinkedIn profile.
LinkedIn. Okay.
The
Yeah.
LinkedIn profile can be infinitely long.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think if I was looking at trying to print mine the other day, and it would be, 45 pages
Yeah.
long, you know.
Yeah. That's
But,
that's a big.
but the point is, it's not that my profile is long.
Hmm.
My profile is deep.
Mm,
It's deep.
yeah.
So, there's story after story after story that I solve problems with
Mhm.
a team,
Mhm.
with a group of people, you know. Whereas the resume is a direct answer to the position spec or the job description.
Mhm.
Because anything that anybody wants to know about you, they can go to your LinkedIn profile and find all the other stuff.
Mhm.
Because the reason that the response has to be specific to the resume, because usually they're going to run it through a machine
Mhm.
and say, did she say, yeah, do you have 5 years experience? And
Mhm.
your response on your resume, I have 7 years experience.
Mhm.
Do you have? And they're looking for the responsive because you've got to meet qualifications, right?
Mhm.
Then there's the like to haves usually on a resume, right? And you've got a little bit more control on that, what you want to merchandise. But
Mhm.
yeah, when you look at it, your direct response to a job description or position specification will end up being 2 to 3 pages, depending on the seniority of the position. The more senior it is, the longer the resume response typically is.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that clarification right there. So, how did people start coming to you and saying, "Joe, I want you to help me do all this." Like, how did you find yourself like being a coach consultant, and how did you know that you were like good at this?
Well, I got on LinkedIn 21 years ago, and
So
a lady,
2024, I mean 2004. 2004,
yeah,
okay.
2004, and LinkedIn came about in 2003.
Oh,
So I came out
wow.
at it probably 7 or 8 months after it, started. And
Okay.
back then, I could call the director of marketing, the COO, and LinkedIn actually made slide decks for me.
What?
Yeah, PowerPoint slide decks to help military people
Oh,
see that they weren't going to steal their identity.
okay.
Because back then, the dot com boom,
Mhm.
happened in early 2000. So you
Mhm.
still had everybody kind of shell shocked
Mhm.
because everybody's going to steal your identity. uh, so I was having a hard time getting people to join LinkedIn. And, I said,
Mhm.
hey, you guys need to make me a PowerPoint slide deck. And they did.
Okay.
I still have it in the files.
Oh my goodness.
So, but yeah, because today you can't get anybody on the phone at LinkedIn.
No, no, it's like one of the biggest networking platforms.
Right. You know, the last time I looked about a year ago, every second, two people join LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So every 13 days, that's a million people.
Gosh.
So yes, it's big and it's universally used, and I mean, so it's out there and it's big. So anyway, I started using it 20 um, 21 years ago, and then really got, it's about 3 or 4 months. I didn't know what to do with it. And then I kind of got into it because we needed somebody for, our China project. And, I couldn't find anybody through the traditional recruiter system, right? Where you pay money to go find somebody and our company did, and they said they tried 6 months, kept our money. Said we gave it best effort, and then I said, well, okay, I gotta find I gotta solve this problem. So
Mm.
what I found was LinkedIn. I could find people that had worked in China, back
Wow.
in 2005,
Okay.
and maybe they didn't do what we needed,
Mhm.
but I was able to send that person a message saying, hey, here's my phone number, can we please talk, or here's my email address. I could send them a message, and then if I got them on the phone, they'd say, well, yeah, Susie, Bill, and Bob did those kind of projects in China. And then, I at least had a lead,
Mhm.
chase them down. And then so I saw the real power of LinkedIn. We were paying this key money to these big search firms to try to find us somebody. And, this was a new novel way, and it didn't cost anything. Yes, it took a little effort, and you
Mhm.
had to, you found somebody that knew somebody else that knew somebody else that knew somebody else. But the bottom line is we got it done.
Mhm.
And so I said, this thing's got lot of power. So I just started learning how to use it. And then I realized I had just come out of the military, and my transition from the military to the private sector was an absolute disaster
Mm.
because I thought I knew what I was doing. And I really didn't. And secondly, I needed to be able to communicate what I did in the military in the vernacular of a hiring manager.
Mhm.
Because the hiring manager, okay, they don't know all these military terms and jargon and all that kind of stuff. The only exception is the, defense contractors. It's
Mhm.
a little bit different if I've got people that want to go to work in defense.
Mhm.
If you want to go to work in the private sector, you've got to be able to explain what you did in the military as it relates to the particular position
Mhm.
that you are seeking in the private sector. And
Mhm.
so, what I had learned is how to be a translator.
Yes.
You're
Mhm.
basically translating military language to um, private sector language.
Right. Everyday people.
And now there's all kinds of tools for that, but way back then, there wasn't. There's AI now that will take this and your experience in the military, and you know um, bam, there it is. And then you got to look at it and say, okay, I need to edit this a little bit, or what have you. So I started coaching on LinkedIn. I was on LinkedIn 21 years. I started coaching on it 20, more or less as a ministry to try to help people, because I saw this as a super valuable tool, if you learned how to use it right.
Mhm.
And so I probably coached 1,000 or more people just kind of as a ministry. Then when I got into the executive search business in 2014,
Mhm.
once you know everybody finds you know you're in executive search, they want to call you and say, hey Joe, can you help me? First of all, you have anything for me? uh, no, we're not searching in that particular area. Okay,
So
can you
are
help?
companies coming to you to find an executive search,
No, these are
or people?
individuals.
Oh,
these are
individuals. Okay.
these are job seekers, right?
Okay. Okay.
They say, hey, can you help me with my LinkedIn profile? Can you help me with my resume?
Mhm.
So the most of the big search companies, and I was working for one at the time,
Mhm.
have a rule that you don't talk to job seekers.
Okay. Mm.
And the reason is they take up your time, and the company wants you to get out there and get business, and
Mhm.
you work for the company.
Mhm.
So I told a lot of these people, I said, look, I can help you before, at breakfast. I can help you on the phone at lunch, or we can meet, after work. But I'm a rule follower. The
Mhm.
company says this, I'm going to do it. Um, so the first batch, I kind of helped, and they got interviews,
Mhm.
they got jobs, and then they told all their friends and family.
Hey, hey, I got this job through this guy.
Yeah, and so the phone started ringing at the house at 5 o'clock in the morning, and it
Mhm,
would rung,
mhm,
it would rang at 11 o'clock at night and all in between, you know. And my wife said,
mhm.
"Hey, Joe, you need to go back to your day job." And or she said, "You ought to make this a business." And I said, "Well, why do you think this would be a good business?" And she said, "Joe, I'm listening you talk to these people, and you sound like you're developing officers in the Army."
Mm.
So I was in the Army for 34 years, and you know, all you do there is help develop people,
Mhm,
really. And as an officer, you had subordinate officers, and so you were always helping them try to get to their next school,
mhm,
trying to help them get to their next assignment, and you're trying to help them get to their um, next promotion.
mhm,
And all of these required, you know, some finesse. You know, you had to build up their portfolio of experience, right? So one guy, you look at him, or one lady, take a look at them, and you say, okay, you don't have any communications experience, huh? Okay, we're going to make you we're going to give you the additional duty as communications officer, and you're going to, you know, take care of this unit's responsibility in all the communication areas, you know, which involved maintenance, you know, what was the status of the repair of radios or equipment, you know, all that
mhm,
kind of stuff. And so what that did is over time, that gave them experience. And then when it came time for their performance rating, you know, I could talk about that, you know,
mm,
which would put it in their portfolio of experience. And so uh, when my wife said that, what happened is like a blinding flash.
mhm,
Okay. All I've done, you know, for 30 plus years is
mhm.
develop.
Yeah.
And so when somebody was calling me and asking for help on a LinkedIn profile or a resume, they're just asking me to help develop them,
Mhm,
you know, because, you know, if you know where you are
mhm,
and you know where you want to go, then there's a way to build a LinkedIn bridge to get you from where you are now to where you want to go.
mhm. Yeah. So all those calls at 5 a.m. and 11 p.m. and your wife said, make a business out of this. And so when did you finally, I don't want to say accept, but you're like, wow, I'm good at
So
this.
in 2014, I started seriously, you know, looking at, you know, 2014, 2015, you know, making it a business, you know, structurally learning how to best do it, you know. And so to date, I've coached and assisted 738 executives, veterans, and students.
Wow.
And so what's really nice is I'm in the second generation of some families. So I might do my first three generation family this year.
Oh my goodness. So is it like grandparent, parent, and then child?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Wow. Congratulations.
No,
You're
I've done
like a family heirloom here.
well. You know, that really says a lot if somebody's going to turn over their children to you.
Yeah.
You know, so that's really what I consider a very high compliment.
Yes. Yes. You're like the generational wealth here.
Well, you know, I'm at that stage where, okay, I had a military career for 34 years. Okay, I've got all of the experience in the leadership, the coaching, the counseling, you know, developing in people, and then another 21 years in the private sector.
Yeah.
And really, the private sector, what has happened is it took me a while,
Mhm.
but I found out what my God given gifts are. I found out what my passions are,
Mhm.
you know. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, what everybody should try to do
Mhm.
is if you can make money from your passion,
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. Does it feel like work to you?
Well, I get the reward of watching people develop before my very eyes,
Mhm.
you know, and get what they want, or at least be better off than, you know, when they started.
Mm-hmm.
And so about 20% of my clients come back to me in a different stage of life,
Okay.
you know. And so with that, so I've helped senior people. So sometimes I'm a consultant on their communications to their board of directors. Sometimes I'm helping them with their C-suite executives. Hey, this guy doesn't relate well. Can you work with him? This
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. So helping these people um, has also been a good referral source for either consulting or helping other new people.
Mm-hmm. So earlier you talked about IQ versus EQ. And has a lot changed in the last 10 years since you started this? Where
Well,
mhm,
it
go ahead.
has changed.
Yeah.
It has changed. I mean, LinkedIn doesn't stay static. Life doesn't stay static. And I tell people, the minute you're born, I mean, you just go through a change process
Mhm.
up until the time you know, depart this world. Everything's constant has changed. People were complaining about, AI is going to do this, and I said, stop complaining about it and figure out how you're gonna. Hey, where's your niche in this thing? If it's coming
Yeah.
and it's staying, you better figure
Gotta
your
learn how to
niche,
collaborate with it.
or start using it in some form so that when somebody asks you, hey, do you know how to do any of this?
Mhm.
You say, yeah, I've experimented with this and that. I wrote a paper, and it
Mhm.
helped me with this or that. Other than say, oh my gosh, wring my hands and AI is
Right.
here. You
Take
know,
over.
it's another thing. I
Mhm.
remember the big hot word 10 years ago was big data, right? Big data. We've got all this data, and now we're going to analyze um, this data and see what we're going to do. And if you fast forward that, that's just a more specific analysis.
Mhm.
And um, people will say, well, AI was just invented. I said, look, when you put your toast in the toaster, your bread in the toaster, okay, do you stand there? And they say, well, no, I put the bread in the toaster and, it dings when the toast
Mhm.
comes up.
Yeah.
Well, so the toaster has had artificial intelligence embedded in it.
Mhm.
Okay, so artificial intelligence is, um, you have water faucets now that if they run too long, they just turn off, right?
And we love that. We love that. I love that.
Yeah. So my point is, artificial intelligence has been around. It's just been marketed and thrown in our face, um, every time we turn around as the big new deal. And
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's not big. I'm just saying it's been here and it's growing very fast, and
Mhm.
we're all going to have to be part of it in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And regardless if we want it or not, it's here to stay.
It is.
Mhm. Yeah, it's here to stay. What has changed in the last 10 years that companies are looking for
In the
in
last
leadership?
10 years.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so 10 years ago, say I looked at somebody's LinkedIn profile,
Mhm.
right? And I had enough experience if they had the job description, not really just the job title. So I know if that person had the job title, they probably had these responsibilities, or they probably oversaw that. Okay, um, because I just have a lot of experience looking at jobs and all that kind of stuff. And so when I saw something like, okay, that person might be a good candidate for this, well, I would pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, Billy, you have this on your LinkedIn profile. As CFO, did you have these additional responsibilities? Oh, yeah. I just don't. I just put the job title on there. I don't do this and I don't do that. And I said, well, you
Mhm.
said, would you like to be considered for an opportunity? And if so, I send the position spec over and they say yes or no. And then I say, hey, I need a resume, and oh, by the way, You might want to dress up your LinkedIn profile so that the two of them look good. Now, the difference today
Mhm.
is, when I look at a LinkedIn profile, um, I look at it for maybe 10 or 12 seconds and it's go or no go.
Mm.
And
Did
resumes
you
are
know like
kind of the
that?
same way, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, recruiters been doing that for years. You either have what I need, it's up front here, and okay, you have what I need, so now it's going to justify me another 45 seconds
Mhm.
to going in that. So your LinkedIn profile is that same way. So you've got to capture people,
Mhm.
when they're on your profile, and that is as much an art as it is a science. But
Mhm.
the reason I tell you that is if you're not show ready, right, then I'm not ever making that call again.
Mm.
Because 10 years ago, it took 6 weeks to do, this entire, executive drill, to go through that. And now, that 6 weeks has gone to somewhere between 18 and 20 days.
Mm.
Okay. So, like, so if you don't have your profile, you could be the best person in the world, but you don't have your profile straight. Next gal,
Mhm.
next guy,
Mhm.
right? And as
Mhm.
long as I can find people, right,
Mhm.
that meet the bill, then you. What I'm saying is, don't choose to be left behind. Don't choose to sit at the back of the bus. I mean, it's your life. You've got to show up, and your billboard, you have to choose for it to be big.
Mhm. Yeah. And so you said that most of your clients are, 45 who are going through this transition, of course, being the transition wizard. What about people who are in their 30s? And I say this because a lot of people do not like LinkedIn. They feel like, oh, it's like an Instagram, but people are just promoting themselves, putting themselves out there. What would you say to those people who feel this way? Because I use my LinkedIn and I met you through LinkedIn. So thank you for that. And I've met the most amazing people through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
How should people who have these, no, not that you have to convince them, but what would you say to those people who would say, I'm not going to use LinkedIn because, it's whatever. How would you say, what are they missing out on?
Okay. So think about it this way:
Hmm.
since the beginning of time up to present day, like this very second, uh, there's a way not to even use a resume. There's a way not to even use a LinkedIn profile. Don't need any of that stuff. Okay. But the only people that you could market to for a job is the people that know you personally and in depth.
Hmm.
So you can get by without any of that stuff if everybody knows you,
Yeah.
you know, especially if you're in a family business or something like that. Then the further that you want the opportunities away from your inner circle,
Hmm.
the more you're going to have to be really savvy on
Hmm.
LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is all about you being found for what you bring to the table. For example,
Hmm.
let's use me as an example.
Yeah.
I've coached in 15 different countries, okay, but I've never advertised. So, how can you coach in 15 different countries and never advertise? That's because these people ran searches on LinkedIn and they found me,
Hmm.
right? Which means they sent me a LinkedIn note, right? Then we either got on the phone or exchanged message traffic. And then we, agreed to, coach, or assist or do whatever they needed. So, uh, the old way, the old way was you go out and try to get a job.
Hmm.
Okay. That means you're in the active role of getting something.
Hmm.
But the problem is you're only getting what people show you.
Very true.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the hidden job market for all the really great jobs are the ones that have been given to contract recruiters or in-house recruiters in a company or retained executive recruiters like myself, and we're searching for the ideal candidate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't know that you're being searched for.
Yeah.
So in other words, if you choose not to use LinkedIn and you're 30 years old, then you either need to stay at your current job and they kind of know you and promote you inside. Okay. But if you ever want an opportunity outside, you're going to have to go through all this work to create a LinkedIn profile and make sure your resume and LinkedIn profile are, in sync. So, so I
Yeah.
think everybody sooner or later
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get there. And it's a lot easier to keep track of what you did when you're doing it
Mm-hmm.
than like us, where you have to. Well, LinkedIn came about when, we were out of our 30s. So
Mm-hmm.
you're having to go back and try to, okay, what did I do in that job? Let me see if I can find the file, you know, uh, and find an old resume and
Mm-hmm.
and rebuild it. So
Mm-hmm.
young people I talk to, I just tell them, build it now, keep it up,
Mm-hmm.
and the worst that could happen is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But I can guarantee you one thing: if you can't be seen by LinkedIn, you can't be seen by the 98% of the recruiters that are using it.
True, true. I was gonna say true that. True that. True that. And you're right. And and then I'm not trying to say people complain that they're not getting opportunities, but like you said, it, the jobs that it's all about connection and who you know. I've learned that, especially since I become an entrepreneur and really used LinkedIn to my advantage. Most people contact me now versus me applying for jobs, just
Right.
endlessly hoping that the recruiter will reach out. And it's actually the opposite that where recruiters reach out instead of me reaching out to the recruiters. And so I remember you telling me a story that you worked with someone who you said, do you want them to reach out to you or do you want to reach that out to them? And the whole intention is to have them reach out to you.
Well, yes. I mean, okay, for you to apply for a job, you have to see it,
Mhm.
right? So there could be lots of jobs that are out there that are ideally suited for you, but you can't see it.
Mhm.
Okay. So the reason that you want a world class LinkedIn profile is the people that are searching to fulfill those jobs, will you come up in the search? And basically, you're in a noun and verb war with whoever your peer competitor is. The more nouns and verbs you have,
Mhm.
the greater your likelihood of success. So that's why we say tell story after story after story that you solve problems.
Mhm.
Okay, because when you tell story after story, you're adding content. And if you're adding content, you're adding words. And if you're saying that you actually did something, to a metric, it's what I call compelling content.
Mhm.
Okay, this 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 person can measure their production. You know, I have this talk with a lot of the people I work with. Look, if you can't measure your production, I can't sell you, because basically my job as an executive recruiter is one to find you and
Mhm.
then help in the sale.
Mhm.
In other words, close the deal.
Mhm.
You know, and I think LinkedIn is the great equalizer in that.
Yeah. So we mentioned merchandising. How does one merchandise themselves?
Okay, um, you tell a story that you solve a problem.
Okay.
Okay, because solving that problem, with a group usually,
Mhm.
you know, uh, is you're going to have some metrics out of that. You're going to have, we saved money, we made money, we did what the marketing department wanted. There was some task, right? And that y'all got it done under budget, on schedule. All those are things that people would like to know if they're thinking about putting you in charge of something
Mm-hmm.
that's going to require frequent projects where you're going to have to deliver on time and on target. And so, do you have a track record of doing that? And LinkedIn gives you the ability to articulate that. So, if you took LinkedIn all the way out to its exponential end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you told everything you be no do, okay, then you have answered every potential interview question that could ever be asked about you
Mm-hmm.
because your answer is already embedded in social media and it can be backed up
Mm-hmm.
by some of the friends that you worked with. So, what LinkedIn does is give you the complete ability to present yourself as a package deal. Black and white, the resume is black and white. The LinkedIn is an oil portrait.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in an oil portrait, we can see the brush strokes, we can see the hue and the color. And the portrait's either romantic, naturalistic,
Mm-hmm.
or realistic.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a way to decide how you're going to be viewed.
Yeah.
So you have multiple personas. I have multiple personas. So you can choose the amount of personas that you want to be seen. So part of my persona comes from the military, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being in charge, solving problems, being a senior leader. Got those examples in there.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it's, solving business problems, so those are in there, you know. So sometimes you're a soccer mom or you're a baseball mom.
Mm-hmm.
All of that can be portrayed in a LinkedIn profile.
Yes, again.
Okay. And then you can back it up with stories
Mm-hmm.
because most of the places on LinkedIn give you the ability to lay out somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so why wouldn't you tell the story? Okay. I was, supported Little League for 4 years as a volunteer. And, here's 2,000 characters of my involvement, you know,
Mm-hmm.
who, what, when, where, why, how, and the metrics.
Mm-hmm.
You ran the concession stand, you had to fundraise, you had to do all those things. There's places to tell those stories. And see, that says something about your independent abilities to do other non-structured things.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
if you
love that.
if you
Yeah.
if you've done it,
Yeah.
why not take credit for it?
Mm-hmm. I like that. Take credit for it because, a resume, especially if you are a stay-home parent, like the soccer parent, the hockey mom, you do a lot of work that is not paid. And so when you're ready to go back out there, it doesn't show that you have work experience. But when you mention you do all of that, that's work. It's just not paid, but it's work. And so for any like stay-home parent right now, use LinkedIn to your advantage by telling the story of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, there's places. I mean, there's an infinite number of places to hang that. In other words, um, I think when you first get on LinkedIn, right?
Mhm.
So LinkedIn it issued me a skeleton, bleached white skeleton of Joe Frankie III, right?
Mhm.
So then when I first got on, I said, I got this job, right? This is my name.
Mhm.
It's in Houston, Texas. That's about all you need to start on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
Name, a job, and a place. So
Mhm.
I put a little bit of skin on the head up here. And then what LinkedIn gives you is this entire skeleton.
Mhm.
And your job is to go hang muscles, ligaments, and tendons everywhere. And that means use every thing that LinkedIn gives you that fits for you, like the volunteer section. Okay. Then there's organizations you belong to, right? So maybe, you volunteer in Little League Baseball and you probably belong to the Little League Association, right?
Mhm.
And there's a story about what you do at the association. There's a story what you do up here volunteering with the team. So, I mean, there's ample ways to tell stories. They have your honors and awards, you know. Each one of those are 2,000 characters. So you were given honors and awards. In some cases, you were given honors and awards for your volunteer work.
Mhm.
That's another place to tell a story.
Mhm.
Um, let's see, projects. Yeah, so you have project section, just like what we were talking about. Project section is something where you tell a story that you got something done with a group of people. And the project section gives you the ability to give credit to other people. It says
Mhm.
other contributors,
Mhm.
so that's very valuable. Then you can get recommendations from people
Yeah.
that would recommend you,
Mhm.
and those recommendations can be populated there.
Mhm.
And so what I'm saying is there's all kinds of places to hang content, you know, and if you don't understand, then go to mine and go to all the different places, and at least you'll see an example.
I will go
I,
to yours. I
I'm
I
not,
actually have already, but it's wonderful. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm not saying it's ideal. What I'm
Mhm.
saying is I tried to use the sections to help, you know, benefit, what I'm trying to do.
Mhm. Yeah. So you worked with people from over 15 countries,
Right.
and it's been all mainly from word of mouth.
Right. They do searches.
Okay.
Some people I say, how, because anytime somebody contacts me that I don't know, right?
Yeah.
I say, how'd you
Yeah.
find me? And
Yeah.
they said, well, like the CEOs call me up, says, Joe, I think I'm going to need some help. And I said, well, how did you find me?
Yeah.
And he said, well, you're a blood donor.
You're a blood donor?
Right.
Okay.
And I said, well, why, I'm not sure how this, I can help. And he said, well, Joe, I've decided I'm going to do business with blood donors because my daughter requires frequent blood transfusions.
Oh.
So in my volunteer section, one of the places is I'm a blood donor for Carter, Blood Network or whatever it is here in Houston.
Yeah.
And so every time I donate blood, I go out there, and because a lot of times they'll have an emergency or something, they'll call and says, "Hey, can you come do this?" And if I'm not traveling, I do. And
Mhm.
so the fact that I went over there and did that, I put 2 or 3 sentences under that volunteer section with the date that I donated blood. And people will say, well, what good is that? All I can tell you is people are calling me up because I'm a blood donor. And they had a problem that they needed solving, and we came to terms, and, he wrote a check.
Wow. The power of like, I think, kindness and empathy, and how it can come back to you, like things that blood donor, I would never have imagined a
Well, the
blood
other
donor.
the other thing on my licenses and certification, I put all my military certifications, right? So one of
Mm.
them, I was formerly a jump master. In other words, I controlled the exit out of the aircraft of military paratroopers.
Mhm.
And so I've got that jump master certification there. And one time somebody called me and said, I said, how'd you find me? He said, well, you're a jump master. And so he was a older gentleman and he needed some consulting help. But who in the what I want to try to get to your audience right now is this one point. Do not let your subconscious guide you in what you need to put out there, because you'll say, well, I don't need to do that. I'm saying put everything you be no do,
Mhm.
and the worst that could happen is nothing.
Mhm.
Or if you put everything you be no do, and somebody might contact you that you wouldn't ever met ever in your life, and um, I've got ample examples of that. And that's
Mhm.
where I tried to say, okay, I need to get away from all these restrictions of what I think people want
Hmm.
and just lay it out there and just see what happens. And you can't wrap your imagination around somebody else's imagination.
That's true. That's true. So, what do other people from other countries like? Do you notice the difference at all, like from here and other countries, what they're looking for, or not at all?
Well, so I'm dealing with English speakers, right?
Okay.
So what most of the time what they're trying to do is understand LinkedIn and how to organize it, to be able to get what they want. Because
Mm,
remember, they're not native English speakers, right?
yes.
So if they're not physically here,
Mm-hmm.
right, they may understand some part of the American culture,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't understand it all until you actually put on the moccasins and and
Mm-hmm.
walk a mile in the culture. So
Yeah.
part of my thing is helping them be seen in such a way uh, that doesn't look weird.
Can you provide like a generic example, like or just like a general example?
Like, for example, you know, they just want to put that they went to college, you know.
Mm.
And I said, well, right now, all this says is um, you gave money and they handed something called BA. And I said, it doesn't say you know anything, doesn't say you
Yeah.
learned anything.
Mm-hmm.
You have 1,000 characters plus activities and societies in each activities thing. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in each education thing. So the 1,000 characters, I mean, what did you learn?
Yeah.
Who was your favorite professor? Did you work full time? Did you have an additional job? You know, I have some clients that want me to find people that, when they went and got their baccalaureate degree, that they work full time.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they want somebody the ability to balance family, education, and a job.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you did that, and I don't know that, I can't help sell that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So, in other words, I always say, don't sell yourself short. Don't under merchandise yourself because your own subconscious will get in the way and say, well, my grandmother told me I shouldn't say stuff like that.
Stay humble. We hear that a lot. Stay
Well,
humble.
see,
Be humble.
yeah, okay, be humble, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not bragging if you've done it.
Mm-hmm.
If you've physically done it and it can be measured, then okay, that's why they give people awards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you achieved this level of distinction. Okay, we're going to give you this award. So um, don't under merchandise yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. And so, are most of your clients like men, women, or is it both?
It's both. A lot of my women clients are um, they're not getting what they want in the workplace because they're
Mhm.
not being seen.
In leadership roles, or are they wanting leadership roles but are
They're
not getting
wanting
leadership
leadership
roles?
roles, but they don't think they're being seen. Okay,
Ah,
so we use an asymmetric approach. In other words, we go
okay,
through the back door
okay.
and we build their LinkedIn profile to show that what their production really is. Now, this means it's also they got buy-in from their peers that they're working with too, right?
Yeah.
And there's a whole strategy of setting up a meeting with the supervisor and what to go in and what to say and all that kind of stuff. And I've had pretty good. I've had a lot of satisfied people, but that's really it's a combination of LinkedIn coaching,
Mm-hmm.
personal coaching, and
Mm-hmm.
life coaching.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I totally agree. And so when you help the women, for most of my watchers are women, and
Okay.
so when you help the women, do they finally get what they want? Do they finally get the role that they've been seeking? And oftentimes is it out of their current company?
Well, sometimes I'm working with two right now where their
Okay.
future is going to be outside the current company.
Okay.
So we built their LinkedIn profile. We've got the recommendations from all the key people, that they touch and feel inside that particular company, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because she has far reaching touches. I mean, she's got relationships. She can get anything done. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but she's not being rewarded with promotions in her particular arena. So we're
Mm-hmm.
both looking inside the company, uh, and we're looking, outside the company as well. And naturally, it's really a choice at the end of the day. She gets an offer, evaluated. If that's something you want to do, then jump. But the key is always jump from a lily pad to another lily pad. In other words, I've had people say, "Well, I'm going to quit tomorrow." I said, "Don't do that.
Mm,
Gut it
okay.
out. Let me work with you, and it's a lot easier to get a job if you have a job."
Hmm. When people say that, is it because of their mental health? Is it because they're fed up, or what is it when they say, "I'm going to quit tomorrow, Joe"?
Well, I mean, if it's that bad, you may have to do it, but a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
it's just built up distaste, and when they're talking to me, it's a 911 call as opposed to, a call that should have been made, 6 months ago, and let's have an orderly fashion of your
Mm-hmm.
let's organize your departure.
Right. You sound like a therapist.
Well, no, it's just, I mean, I've been through 738 people, so
Yeah.
the one beautiful thing about that is I've learned more from the 738 than they've learned from me
Mhm.
because I've seen a little bit of everything.
Mhm. I'm sure we've seen everything. Seen and heard everything.
Yeah, I mean, there are some really sad places to work. There's some sad recruiters out there, I have
Mm.
to say, that take advantage of people. And anyway, um, I just think if you focus on really, if you can define what you want and
Mhm.
you're really honest with where you are, there's a way to build a bridge to get you to where you are. Now,
Mhm.
one time I was talking to a young lady. She said, "That's what I want to do," and I said, "Look, I'm a I'm an executive recruiter, and you need 2 more years of college if that's really what you want to do." And she said, "Well, I'm not going to go back to 2 years of college." And I said, "Well, okay, then you go sit at the back of the bus, and you please know that I'm only going to take people off the front 3 seats of the bus." And any recruiter will tell you that because we have to bring the best people, right? And the
Mhm.
best people have to be, first of all, qualified.
Mhm.
And right now, without this 2 years of college, you can't get that qualification. I don't care how much experience you have. The the there are so many people out there with this qualification that nobody's going to look at you. So you can either invest the time now or
Mhm.
decide you want to go down a different path. But eventually, she said that's what I want to do, and she invested the time and got what she wanted.
Okay. I like that. If you want to be chosen, you have to sit at the front of the bus, not in the back.
Right. In other words, there's things you've
Mhm.
got to do to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
You've got to be competitive. And if somebody tells you you're not competitive and gives you a reason, you need to stop, look, listen, think, process, and maybe there's something you need to do.
Yeah. This might sound harsh to my audience, but I think right now, too many people are sitting in the back, but don't want to do the work to be in the front of the bus.
Yeah, look, working on your profile, especially with me, is hard work. It's like writing a term paper on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about it. In order to populate the LinkedIn profile, what are you doing? You're getting your stories together, you get your outlines together,
Mm-hmm.
you've got your drafts together, and then you start, organizing how, which is more important, which ones you want to populate first. I mean, there's a whole structure to this work.
Mhm.
But usually with hard work comes reward.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee you, if you don't want to put the
Mhm.
hard work in, if you're expecting any difference or change in your situation, uh, I'd be surprised.
Mhm. Yeah. I was gonna say something and I totally forgot. What what would you say in your experience, recruiters who are looking at LinkedIn, what are they looking for? Like, what's the number one thing they're looking for?
Well, now remember, when recruiters are looking, right,
Mhm.
they have a position specification.
Mhm.
So they don't just look to look.
Mhm.
So the position specification, the job description,
Yeah.
determines what they're going to do. So
Mhm.
most of us, we look at that position specification, determine what the key things are. There's usually 3 or 4 sentences in there that, where it's bleeding, you can feel the pain. They want somebody to change this.
Yeah.
So then you take 10 keywords, put it up in the search box on LinkedIn, and look at the first 400 results. Then I vary those search words,
Mhm.
the order, and seeing if I'm getting any better group. And I'm looking at the first 40 out of 400. Hey,
Mhm.
is this the kind of, am I getting the grouping I want?
Mhm.
Or is it like off the wall? Am I getting people that, plow fields, and I'm looking
Mhm.
for a finance person? I said, well, okay, then change the thing. And then what happens is you kind of get in the groove, and I see who's coming up consistently in this top 40, even when I vary the search words.
Mm.
So over time, can develop about 15 people I'm going to work with, and try to get that down to 5.
Mm.
Because some of them, you call them and they're perfectly happy. They, okay, no problem. Next person.
Mhm.
And that's how these people get these little notes and saying, hey, would you like to consider this opportunity, or know somebody, that would fit this opportunity?
Mm.
So that's how they do it. I mean, when a recruiter's looking, uh, they're looking in order to fulfill a requirement,
Mhm.
because that's how they get paid.
Right. Fulfill a requirement, yeah.
Yeah.
So the status quo. Yeah. I was gonna ask you something else, but I totally forgot. So I apologize. What any last words for people who are still hesitant about using LinkedIn, or what would you say? Like, what are your last words of wisdom, or just what do you think is important for people to know?
LinkedIn is probably the best business intelligence tool on the planet.
Okay.
Okay. If I want to know something about a business, I go on LinkedIn, it brings me up their company, brings me up their website, brings me up how many people they have, brings me up how many people they've hired, in the last 2 years. I mean, they give you all kinds of data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, why wouldn't you want to be a part of that, so that you can be found,
Mm-hmm.
because all of us are trying to, you know, um, take care of our families. And the way you take care of your families is basically in the United States is you get more responsibility, because with more responsibility comes more money.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first 20 years of your career, 25 years of career, I mean, you head down, got the grind, you got kids, you going to baseball practices, you're paying for a house,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, trying to pay for a car, all those kind of things. Then what you're trying to do
Mm-hmm.
is move up and take care of your family,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call that.
Mm-hmm.
So the first 25 years, that kind of happens, and the family matriculates through that. So around 45 or so,
Mm-hmm.
now that part of that family's gone,
Mm-hmm.
you're at the halftime of the game. So you went in the locker room, you were trying to be successful in the first half,
Mhm.
take care of everybody. Now you're in the locker room and you decide, okay, what's the second half of my career going to look like? You know, um, hey, do I want to keep this pace? Do I want to find something I really like? Do I, because the second half is about significance.
Mhm.
How can I be significant? How can I help other people? How can I, continue, the upward journey, even in my career, if I want to continue to do that.
Mhm.
But that's why a lot of times I say I get these over 40s because, there's a big change and they got to make a decision about, what they're choosing to pursue.
Yeah.
Because once you step out of the game, right?
Mhm.
Say you want to go back in as a W-2
Yeah.
uh, in your late 40s, that's a high bridge.
Mm. Yeah. When you were talking, I felt like your 40s is about like the awakening. I remember the 20s and 30s, remember my 20s and 30s, it was so much chaos because you're chasing. And then now I work for myself and I don't have the chaos, but it's a different type where I am a freelancer. I have to
Yeah,
put myself out there. I have to sell myself. But
yeah,
it's a different type where I'm like, I like this because it's about me now. And I think that 45, 50, that's where maybe most people are.
yeah. So I mean, you kind of got the decisions to make, and there's nothing wrong with keeping with the original decision.
Mhm.
You might be working with a company, and it's a big company, and they promote people, and you just ride that all the way up through. But those are few and far between anymore.
Yes. Yes. Very much so. Very much so. Yeah. Um, before I let you go, what does owning it mean to you?
Owning that means to me is you accept the responsibility of your predicament, and that
Mm,
and what that means to you is um, stuff is going to happen to you. You own it, and maybe it wasn't right, maybe it was wrong, but who cares? How your mental mindfulness, your attitude towards what's happening to you is everything. So when you own it both physically and mentally.
mhm.
Okay. And fighting it or getting upset over it and all that kind of stuff, you're just wasting really good energy. It's like every once in a while, my wife says, well, I'm saying, are you worried about that? When you say, I think so. And I said, well, we have no control over that. So we need to pray for that.
Mhm.
But there's no point in spending any time on something that we have absolutely no ways to affect. Now, if we're talking about something where we make a decision and we can affect it, that's a whole different
Mhm.
story. But I think what I've found is most people worry about a lot of stuff that they can't control. And if you don't believe that, just watch the news.
Mhm.
I mean, you got to let it go. You got to stay in your lane, focus, and own your lane.
Mhm. I love that. And I can tell that you are a coach and consultant by your mindset of just saying all that stuff right there.
I've been down the hard way.
I could
This is a
tell.
lot
I
easier.
could tell. Yeah. And we've been through that. That's why we're able to say this. It's like,
Well,
what are we gonna do?
uh, somebody asked me, said, Joe, I mean, how'd you get so much wisdom? I said, from a lot of failure.
Yes. Yeah. From a lot of failure, from a lot of like, oh shit. Like,
Yeah.
ah shit. And it's like, what did that teach me? It's like there a lot of things are out of our control.
Yeah,
And sometimes you just have to accept the peace, stay in your lane, keep doing what you're doing. And yeah, that's all to it. Why stress yourself out when it's out of your control?
absolutely.
Yeah. Any final words before I let you go, Joe?
No, I've really enjoyed our interaction. This whole format that you have has been really the, kind of the high point of my day. It was just like, we're sitting in a couple of chairs somewhere,
Yeah.
in a living room having a really neat discussion.
Yeah, yeah. And my whole intention is just to have conversations about people and how people can forge their own path and own it. And you are definitely helping people own their own path. I think, our society thinks that when you hit 40, 50, oh, life is over. And it's like, no, this is just the beginning, except you have more control now.
The good Lord gave you a transmission for you to
Mhm.
shift gears at certain times.
Yeah, yeah. And so, if anybody is interested in working with you, what is the best way to connect with you?
The best way is on LinkedIn. I'm Joseph Frankie III
Okay.
with in LinkedIn speak. That's three triple I's.
And I will include all of Joe's information, his book,
Okay.
his websites, all of that there too. And so, Joe, I want to thank you. And, you and I went to an event together in Las
Hmm.
Vegas, and I would say whoever we met, we all asked, "What is your LinkedIn? What is your LinkedIn?" Connect me via LinkedIn, especially international people. We all asked for their LinkedIn and they asked for my LinkedIn. I was like, wow, good thing my LinkedIn is like up to date. I need to update it, but that truly is when you say it's international. I would say everybody asks for LinkedIn.
Well, and that's why I ended up coaching internationally because people want to show up, as best they can,
Hmm.
and put the right foot forward. And so, help them to do that because it's a little bit different in their own countries about how
Hmm.
you do stuff. But I said, if you want to be seen here and want to be competitive internationally, this is the way you need to show up.
Hmm. Yeah. So anybody who's watching this, get a LinkedIn profile. If you haven't gotten your LinkedIn, get your LinkedIn. Like you said, it's like a canvas. It's like a skeleton. You add all the tendons and what else did you say? Muscles
Yeah.
on it, and you get to create. You get to tell your story. And as a matter of fact, Joe, I'm gonna work on mine too. So I was like, oh gosh, I need to work on
Well,
all of that. So
it'll reward you.
it will. It will. Thank you. Thank you. I have a lot to add. And so, again, thank you for being here today. I learned so much. And I appreciate you for reaching out and having such a great conversation. Again, it just feels like us having a coffee or I'm having a Cosmo. And what's your drink of choice? If it had to be a drink of choice?
Oh, my drink of choice
Yes.
is English tea with a little
English
cream.
tea. Okay. How English? Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining. And if you like this episode, please hit the like and subscribe button. And again, all of Joe's information is down on the description box. So, again, Joe, thank you for joining. And I will see everybody next time.
Thank you for having me. This has been enjoyable and productive.
Thank you. All right. Take care, everybody.